Mercedes have been facing what seems like a never-ending list of problems this year. There has been porpoising, budget caps, and Lewis Hamilton's poor performances for the team to deal with. But now it seems they have something else they need to contend with. Want to know about Mercedes' latest problem? Then stick around for the video. Mercedes' season has been all over the place so far this year. The team were the worst sufferers of porpoising for the opening 5 races of the season. Lewis Hamilton has been really struggling in the new car, and the accountants have been struggling to keep the team from spending the $500 million they would normally spend on the car in a season. I'm sure we can all relate to how hard it can be to stick to a budget. But in Monaco, there were hints at a new problem emerging for the team, and in Baku, it was on full display for the whole F1 world to see. If you cast your mind back to Barcelona, you'll remember some very positive comments coming from the Mercedes camp. Mercedes technical director Mike Elliott spoke about the changes they'd made after the Barcelona GP. The package we brought here, we're definitely able to run the car in a position much more close to where we'd ideally run it, said Elliott. So there's a chunk of downforce that comes from that, and the car is just a lot more settled. The drivers look happy now. There's a sort of body language is coming from them that says that they feel a car that feels a bit more like a race car. So what happened in Monaco and then Baku that has completely changed the mood in the Mercedes camp? The car was meant to be fixed, right? To understand this, we need to have a look at the differences between these 3 tracks. The Circuit de Barcelona-Catalunya is a purpose-built racetrack. The surface is designed for racing and is maintained to the highest standard. What this means is that it is incredibly smooth, something that's great for racing the current F1 cars. This generation of car requires an incredibly stiff suspension setup and floor to maximize the ground effect floor's downforce creating effect. In Monaco, the track surface is much worse though. The streets of the Mediterranean city are driven on constantly while the Grand Prix isn't there. There are drain covers, burst pipes that need digging up and repairing, and potholes that need filling. All of this together means that the track surface is incredibly bumpy by F1 standards. The nice thing about Monaco is that the cars can't drive that fast over the bumps because of the tight corners and short straights. In Baku though, things get much worse. The track suffers from the same problems as Monaco. Even before the new formula of cars, the track was a bumpy one for drivers. It's incredibly high speed as well. During the race in Baku this year, Daniel Ricciardo was clocked at doing 345.1 kilometers an hour. That combination of high speed and rough surface makes it a rough day in the office for the drivers at the best of times. But the new spec with their stiff suspension and floor make it even worse. On these rougher tracks, the Mercedes look to be suffering from porpoising, but that isn't completely the case. In Monaco, the top speed registered was Mick Schumacher at 286.1 kilometers an hour. Not really fast enough to initiate the kind of aggressive porpoising that Mercedes had early in the season. No, in Monaco, they were literally just bouncing off the floor of the track. The fix they came up with in Barcelona for the porpoising allowed them to run the car much lower to the floor than before. The team have spoken about getting the W13 to a good spot regularly, and this referred to being able to run it closer to the ground. The closer they can get to the ground, the better the performance is basically. The problem is that normally teams will raise their ride height for Monaco because of the rough track surface, but Mercedes didn't appear to do this. Instead, hoping to make the most of the extra performance they got from running the car closer to the floor. While this wasn't too punishing in Monaco, it had horrific consequences in Baku. Mercedes Formula One chief strategist James Vowles spoke about the effect in a recent Mercedes video. In Barcelona, the car was stable, robust, and we could lower it. And that's the key. We managed to create a package where aerodynamically we were able to work with it a lot more. We could work with setup and we could drop the cars in terms of ride height, producing performance. Come now to Monaco and to Baku. What that unfortunately uncovered is a second issue that was being masked by the first. I'm confident that we've made a step forward in terms of porpoising, but we are very clearly bouncing, and to the outside it looks almost identical. But there is a subtle difference between the two. To be completely honest, if it was a mistake by Mercedes, it was a very bad one to make. The team had years of experience driving at these tracks and should have known exactly what was coming. They will have raised their ride height at both of these tracks in the past. The reality though is that they chose not to raise their ride height to try and get the most out of the performance of the car. In doing so, they submitted their drivers to one of the most uncomfortable and dangerous looking days driving in recent memory. Lewis Hamilton was incredibly lucky not to lose control of his W13 on the start-finish straight a few times, which would have resulted in a horrific crash. Hitting a wall at over 300 kilometers an hour is not something anyone should have to endure. But Mercedes pushed their car setup to a point where the drivers were at a very real risk of that happening. On top of that, the Mercedes bouncing was so bad that Lewis Hamilton lost the feeling in his lower back and bottom, and was unable to feel his seat in the second half of the race. While having a numb bum might seem funny, it shows just how severe the bouncing was and how much damage the W13 was doing to the driver's nervous system. James Vowell was asked about how the drivers were after the race in Baku. "I'm pleased to report that Lewis is here this morning at the Mercedes factory. I spent a few hours with him and he is okay. He'll be back in the car in Montreal," Vowell said. He's an elite athlete that will push the bounds of endurance of himself and the car, and that's what F1 drivers do. That's what makes them exceptional. On this occasion though, we pushed the package and our drivers too far. We're putting them into significant discomfort and we simply can't do that again. Our drivers are not the only ones suffering. You will see in the media a number of comments from a number of drivers who are equally in discomfort and pain. And we have a responsibility now to make sure that this doesn't carry on. James is right. Mercedes do have a responsibility to make sure this doesn't carry on. His team should not be allowed to subject their drivers to those conditions again. It's dangerous for the drivers while they race and a threat to their long-term health. It's a problem that the Grand Prix Drivers Association should be directly addressing and the FIA should be pushing back against. Mercedes' constant request for regulation changes, while they have the power to protect their drivers, is done in incredibly poor taste. One option that a lot of people have spoken about is the FIA introducing regulations that mean that if the drivers are subjected to a certain level of G-force while driving the car, then the cars will be black flagged and retired from the race. Drivers have instruments in their helmets and cars that measure the G-force they're subjected to. And if this was regularly exceeding a certain threshold set by the FIA, then the team would be forced to retire the car. This solution would protect the driver's health and stop teams from setting up their cars in a way that is clearly unsafe, as Mercedes did in Baku. While Mercedes should take all of the blame for what their drivers had to put up with in Baku, they were not helped by the quality of the track surface. Street circuits with a road surface not laid specifically for racing will inherently be bumpier due to natural wear and tear, but Verstappen believes the Baku City circuit was a step too far. It is enjoyable to drive, I think it's getting a bit bumpy in some places, especially now with the new cars being so stiff and low to the ground, said Verstappen when asked about the venue. "I think the main straight is way too bumpy. We have to really try and find a bit of a line, so it would be nice if that could be resurfaced for next year. But overall, I think it's a special track. Also, the second sector, between the castle bit, it's quite unique, I would say. There are changes that need to be made to street circuits. One option is that the FIA do tests on the circuits prior to the race to ensure that they're a suitable quality for racing. If this was done far enough in advance, then the tracks could be resurfaced before the race weekend. Whatever they do, it is obvious that the Baku track will need to be improved for next year. The more pressing issue, though, is the safety of the drivers. This is where the FIA really need to take a firm stance. What happened in Baku to the Mercedes drivers cannot happen again, and the FIA should put in place measures to ensure that it does not. What would you do if you were in Lewis or George's position and Mercedes had made you drive the W13 in Baku? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section. Until we see you next time, drive safe and bye-bye.